Right, let's get into the story now. State of readiness has been put in place after some parts of the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape have been experiencing severe and disruptive weather since this past weekend. This comes after the South African Weather Service issued weather alerts for strong winds and high sea waves and thunderstorms, causing widespread flooding in low-lying areas. Recently, many coastal areas were impacted by coastal storm surges that resulted in the loss of a person in the Western Cape. But to talk more about the severity of the weather and the contingency plans made to assist affected communities, we are joined by Dr Elias Sithole. He's the head of the National Disaster Management Centre. Dr Sithole, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Leah. Thank you very much.
So if you can, just perhaps maybe begin by talking to us about the latest from the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape in terms of the current storms and where we're at.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the viewers. Leanne, we received an early warning as from the 21st of September from the South African Weather Services, which really indicated that there will be some severe weather condition which we will experience, which might result to flooding and heavy rains. Of course, as you have indicated, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, in other part of the Northwest as well, they were really affected by floodings and also storm surges. But let me indicate that as a National Disaster Centre, we've been working very closely with the provincial disaster centers and the municipality disaster management centers, together with other stakeholders, to make sure that our contingency plans, which were put in place, are activated.
Yeah, indeed, because these storms are proving to be rather deadly, and we'll talk about that in a while. I mean, let's just focus into the Nelson Mandela Bay now for a moment in the Eastern Cape. I mean, they've been experiencing drought, and this has been a huge problem for them. So, is the severe weather on top of the drought being experienced a double-edged sword in a way?
Yes, it is, because when the province is experiencing drought, there are a lot of impacts, which you tend to find it either to the farmers or also to the communities, especially where we have got a shortage or scarcity of water in terms of the communities having access to water. Now, when they're experiencing floods, it actually becomes a double sword, if I may put it in that way, in the sense that you tend to find provinces like your Eastern Cape, most of the villages, they've got low-lying bridges, and when we have severe floodings and then the villages are being cut off and kids they can't go to schools, and the elderly living, they can't go to collect their social grants, and the people actually they can't go to work. So really, the droughts and the floods that are affecting the provinces, really, they have got a huge impact. But let me just indicate that as a National Disaster Centre, we've actually put a turnaround strategy to make sure that we work very close with the communities. So that when something like this happens, we know that we don't find ourselves losing lives, because one life is too many. But also, we want to make sure the communities, they are educated in terms of when we are experiencing floods, and they have to be very cautious when they are going to work or the kids are going to schools.
Yeah, I mean, and if we can just sort of keep on the Eastern Cape for a moment, I mean, that's this particular province, and we're still seeing a lot of warnings and these gale force winds that are going to be hammering parts of the Eastern Cape. What are the kind of things that we are warning people? We'll focus on each of the troubled areas, but let's focus particularly on the Eastern Cape at the moment. The things that they shouldn't be doing, warnings to them. How do you handle these kind of situations so that we don't land up reporting on these fatalities that unfortunately we have been for the last week?
Yeah, we always issue the warnings to the communities that when the strong winds or storms are approaching, and they have to stay they have to stay indoors and also avoid open spaces, and also making sure that they remove or take away or put away any loose items which can be blown away. But also, most importantly, is the motorist. Because you tend to find that when we have heavy rains in the communities or in that area, motorists, they tend to be negligent in terms of when they're driving. So we always advise them to say, keep the following distance so that we are able to follow another car on a safe distance, but also making sure that you now and then take note of the alerts which are being issued by the municipal disaster management centers or the provincial disaster management center in terms of where are the risk areas or the hotspots.
Yeah, yeah. And also, of course, the seas, because this is a very treacherous space at the moment. I mean, I'm trying to see the confirmed amount of people that have lost their lives. I mean, taking into account what happened to the Navy personnel, which perhaps we can touch on in a moment, but in terms of the amount of people that have died, I mean, I think we're looking at about 5 this past week, including the Navy personnel. I know that there's, I think, an individual that was washed away in Camps Bay. The search is still underway, and there are many other incidences that have been happening, some that were on the Otter Trail, others that have been in the Eastern Cape. I mean, in terms of disaster management and the amount of the death toll from these storms, do we know what we're looking at so far?
The numbers, we've been receiving reports from different provinces. We will confirm the numbers as we move forward, because we know that sometimes there are areas where people that were affected, and then the provincial disaster centers working with the other stakeholders. They're still just double checking whether there's any casualties in those areas. So as we move along, we will issue the statement in terms of how many deaths we have experienced during this time of the floods.
Yeah, indeed, because I must say I've been sort of searching, and every time I'm searching there's just a whole bunch of different incidences that are popping up. So it would be nice to have a concise story telling us exactly what the picture looks like. Perhaps we can talk about this incident that happened with regard to the Navy personnel and these spring tides that were much more vicious than one would ever have expected, and these weather conditions obviously hampering all of this as well and continuing. Is there more in terms of disaster management that's been set up and can speak about that incident that happened and the surrounding areas as well, whether we talk about Komiki and some of those videos that were coming out of vehicles being washed away, people being washed into the seas? Let's perhaps look at those now in the Cape area, in the Western Cape area.
Yeah, we've been receiving a lot of reports from the Western Cape, and I have been in contact with the provincial head of the Disaster Management Center in the Western Cape, and they have been briefing us on a daily basis in terms of how best they're managing the conditions or the storm surge, which is affecting either the industries, the communities, or affecting the infrastructure. But let me indicate that there is now a proof that our contingency plan is working, because we were able to minimize the impact of some of these weather conditions, either by affecting the infrastructure or affecting the people in terms of the death. But also coming back to the Western Cape in terms of the Navy incidents, I might not have all the information in the space, but we've been observing very close in terms of the impact of the storm surge in the Western Cape. But also, Leah, let me indicate that after 10 years from now, we will actually experience more and more of these kind of things, which calls upon the National Disaster Center and provincial disaster centers to work very close with other stakeholders like your SNDF, SAPS, to make sure that how best we can bring together our resources so that when we are experiencing this kind of incidences, which we are now experiencing in the Eastern Cape, then we can better respond to those incidences.
Mm. Have we seen these kind of incidences to this severity before. I mean, it just seems that we have been reporting on the craziest of weather conditions in our coastal towns. Have we seen these things happening before? Or are you noticing that this is actually just getting worse and worse, and perhaps the whole issue of climate change is a major discussion that we are seeing at play now?
The issue of climate change we've been discussing in terms of what is the impact of the climate change, because we've realized that the weather conditions, they've become even more violent in terms of destruction of the infrastructure or flooding the cities and so on. So there are, I would say, committees which were discussing the issues of climate change. But maybe let me just also respond to our question in terms of, in the context of South Africa, we tend to see that when we are experiencing floodings, they tend to be very intense and actually destroy a lot of infrastructure. But what we are doing as a National Disaster Center, we've realized that there are other countries which they've experienced hurricanes and very strong currencies which have destroyed infrastructure and houses of the community. So we are doing benchmarking so that as a South Africa, as we move forward, we're actually be able to pick it back and do lesson learned from those countries in terms of how best they've managed this kind of weather conditions, so that we can then bring this kind of lesson learned into a South African context. Then we can implement them here. Yes, we are seeing more and more cities and infrastructure being destroyed and damaged. Previously, we didn't have this kind of floodings. For example, where you find that the big city will be flooded, and then some of the townships will be flooded. But also, let me just indicate, when you go to other municipalities or a small city, you tend to find that if we have a city which is being flooded, you realize that either the drainage system is blocked, and maybe we need to do maintenance around it. But fortunately now we're working with the MISA to make sure that we come up with a project of cleaning of a drainage system in those municipalities, so that when we're experiencing this heavy rainfall like this, and then the impact of this kind of floodings is not that much.
All right, we will leave it there. We know that you, imagine, and the team have got your hands full over the warning. I think does come to sort of a little lessened on Tuesday, but today there's still high alert in different parts of the country, whether the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Western Cape, all of those areas need to be very, very vigilant. Dr. Elias Sithole, he of course is the head of National Disaster Management Center, talking to us about these severe weather conditions that are currently affecting parts of the country, and pleased to take it easy, and listening to and hearing from things like the National Sea Rescue Institute also saying, unless you need to go near the sea and participate in activities or anything, try and avoid these areas and activities on days like this, because it is very, very dangerous. And still a man missing, being washed away in Camps Bay. But we'll have more of that in the news, which is right now, it is 7 o'clock.